Mic,
One, two.
mic.
Hello, hello.
Uh-oh.
Welcome to the Sci-Fi Sci, under the Believe Podcast Network. It is indeed a podcast about Black science fiction and fantasy, helping us stay on the same page as a family. Today for episode 112, we'll be discussing romances and the novella A Taste of Honey by Kai Ashante Wilson, who is an incredible writer. Ben, could you hold up the book to the camera? For those of you who cannot see at home, well, you're shaking it. So for those of you who are looking at the YouTube at home, there is a man on the cover with a incredible afro, and he's got a leopard next to him, and then there's another man out past him, but you can't really see who that other man is. This is actually me for the first time, like giving the front cover a little bit of a closer look, but we are very excited about this book, but before we talk about A Taste of Honey, we want to thank those of you out there who are as sweet as honey. You guessed it. I'm talking about our supporters, our patrons. Thank you so much for those of you who give $1, $2, even $5 a month on the Patreon every single month. Special shout out to Jasmine, Venice, Megan, Brittany Martin, Kiala Jordan, Stephanie, Tiffany, and Honora Banks. We super appreciate y'all. If you would like to be a patron and support us monthly, support the Wallen family and this incredible podcast, you can find a link to that in the episode notes. Now, Ben, this is me saying, Ben, now it is your time to speak, because I fear asking you how you're doing is going to send you into a tizzy. Are you drinking out of my A Black Woman is Speaking, Listen and Learn cup?
Yeah, it's a good reminder for me.
I like that.
Because you're the one speaking, and I should be listening.
Let's just take it as you just said it, right? I'm just kidding. You can drink out of my cup as long as you remember.
I only drink this in the home when you're in the home.
I'm always in the home. We both work from home.
Yeah, but if you're outside doing something out of the home,
you have enough respect for me to not drink it.
Yeah, I won't drink it
while I'm away,
because you're probably not, speaking to me, so I don't have to listen
or learn. I love that. Anyway, what you been up to, man?
So I watched a romance with you for something from Tiffany's. It's the new romantic holiday, and I don't really do romances. And this is the first.
It's the new romantic holiday.
It's the new romantic holiday.
Imagine if there was a national holiday called something. Today is something from Tiffany's Day.
So Tiffany becomes like this, leader. This, I guess, what's that term of like evil leader? Like Tiffany, the owners of Tiffany's require
a tyrant.
A tyrant.
Do you remember we were talking
about
tyranny?
There's a tyrannical rule, and Tiffany's takes over, and they have a holiday named Tiffany, and all the men have to go and buy something from Tiffany's.
I love that holiday.
Yeah. So
Unfortunately, that's not what the movie was about.
I don't have enough money to do that. But we don't really watch romances. But this book is a romance, and this is the first romantic book that we've read, or the first romance we've read. And it's a gay romance.
Yes. Two men.
Which,
to clarify, as opposed to two women. Sorry.
Yeah. So, which makes it gay. It's
correct. Yep.
About there.
It was really good.
It was very, very good.
And it was a quick read. You know what? I got to be honest. I was actually having, Ben knows I have anxiety about the smallest things, and I appreciate him working with me on that and I know that he's distracted by tons of, this is why we are married to each other, because we help each other with things. And I have anxiety about a lot of things, and one of which is
that door locked?
Stop it.
I get distracted by a lot of things. I was just
and my anxiety says, wait, the door's not locked. So raise your hand if you have anxiety. Great. I get anxiety about things, and one of the things I get anxious about is whenever we assign a book for the podcast, I get anxious about finishing the book on time, because I just lose track of time, and it's hard to sit down and just like read a book. And so what I typically do is go to Audible. I'm like, well, at least if we're reading a book. I can have
can
audiobook.
clean and-
I can clean and listen to it and read it at night. Like, that's great.
Driving,
and so
yeah.
So I procrastinated with reading this book, and, you know, we try our best to drop the podcast every Tuesday. So on Saturday night, I went to go look up the audiobook for A Taste of Honey. And I discovered on Saturday night that there was no audiobook. So I immediately was like, oh my gosh, I'm not going to finish this book for our podcast, and I'm just going to like spend the day reading when I should be spending time with my family or whatever. And the book is 157 pages, and obviously I read it in like a couple of hours because it was so well written. And I just remember feeling intense gratitude for Ben choosing like just a tight little pussy of a romance story. And I was just like melting in my covers. I was like, oh my gosh, this really takes me back to like, I don't know,
tight
just
pussy?
being in high school and just grabbing a book and wanting to like block everybody out for a couple of hours. So I really, and I was sick most of the weekend. I'm still like almost getting better. So it just felt really nice to like get off my phone for a couple hours and just read this book. So thank you for choosing this book. It was really good.
So I do want to ask you though, because I don't go to romances as a thing to, you know, search out, except I will read a queer romance novel if it involves like fantasy and science fiction. So my question for you is, what is about romance? I guess for you, let's start like specifically for you. What is about romantic comedies or romantic stories that are so appealing to you? And then I want you to sort of expand that question out to what is it about romantic comedies is so appealing, especially towards women. Like women are the primary consumers of romantic novels, romantic comedies. So first for you, what is it about?
I think that there is so much, you know, doom and gloom and uncertainty and especially now, right? That sense of uncertainty and fear has always been present. But now that we have, you know, we as a society, as a globe, have gone through the pandemic, unpredictability is very scary, and it disrupts our routines and it disrupts our lives. So there's something just like hopeful and beautiful and wonderful about a love story. And it gives us hope in our own, even if you're single, if you're married, you just love a love story. There's a predictability and there's a comfort there that I know you're like, I hate that. You're very spontaneous, but like some of us just like to say like, I just want to put on my favorite show that I've seen a bunch of times. So because I know what's going to happen at the end. I know that they're going to be okay. I know that they're going to save the day. And if that makes me boring, fine. But I just had 15 horrible things happen today in my life. So I need to see somebody like make it, or I need to see, like, I just got stood up by this date. So let me go home and watch, you know, Sleepless in Seattle or whatever, to just like make myself believe again. Like there's a level of hope there. That's why I watch them. And I would guess a lot of other women watch for that reason as well, because like when you close the book, there's just doom and gloom a little bit. It's true. I need, like, somebody's got to win.
Why do you think men are not as interested in romance stories? Because, you know, men are part of many of these romance stories, right? Like, you can't have something from Tiffany's without the dude, right? The dude was an important part of that story.
I mean, you know how like the patriarchy hurts everybody? Mm-hmm. Like that just, I think that the patriarchy has made men not gravitate towards a romance novel. It's like from everything from like the marketing of
like
it,
weakness.
Because to be in touch with your emotions and be vulnerable and love has now been marked as such a feminine quality. But when you like look at every groom on their wedding day, they're up there sobbing too, you know? So I like, it's all in how like girl is pink, boy is blue fabric of how we do things. But I think without all that crap, just as like a man wrote this queer love story. I don't even know he's gay. I didn't even look up if he was gay or not. I just was like, this is like some of the great romantic classics that we've ever had were written by men, you know? if you really think about it. But there came a point, not all of them. I'm not saying men are inherently better at writing romance novels, but I'm just saying, like,
Maybe
if
they
you look
just
at
had
like
more opportunity. Well, in publishing in general.
In publishing in general, but like you can't inherently say that men are not interested in romance when you read like, I don't know, I can't even think of like The Great Gatsby or something. Like, what if you had to just like think in your brain like a romance novel or a romance story, what's your go-to?
I think of those like very sexy pictures of the man
like
with
Fabio.
like a mane of a lion.
Yeah, but what story
and, like,
do you think of?
Because
I think of like, oh, The Fault in Our Stars. A man wrote that. That's a love story.
Oh yeah, that's a romance for sure. Yeah, that's John Green. I guess the first one I think of is Beauty and the Beast. That's a romance story.
You think it's so interesting to me that when I say story, I meant like a book off the shelf. Do you think immediately of a book off the shelf of Beauty and the Beast?
I mean, I don't read romance. I don't read romances.
I know, but like, what are those romance? Like Romeo and Juliet.
Oh,
like,
yeah, I guess
that's Shakespeare.
That's
a man wrote that.
That's I guess, but I don't even consider Romeo and Juliet as a romance. It would qualify as a tragedy.
Right. That's true.
So
what is something that you think in your mind, like without even doing hard labor in your brain, like what is what romance story do you see yourself pulling off the shelf?
I always do hard labor in my brain. It's impossible for me not to do hard labor in my brain.
Just pick one. Okay, y'all, I'm unsubscribing from this conversation with Ben.
So the first book that comes into my mind, there were these like Christian romance novels that take place on like a prairie. So I think of those. I can't remember their name. I know my mom liked reading them. And I remember one point hearing that romance novels are not healthy for young women to read because they can be pornographic.
Who said that?
I think maybe someone in my youth group. It might have been a youth pastor.
I mean, that's like but they're also all saying like pornography is the greatest sin known to man.
Pornography is the greatest sin known to man. Say that over and over to get it through our head.
I don't know. You know, this is the thing about it. I wonder if y'all, I remember last week or the week before that, Ben and I were asking each other, like, do you think if you would have met me, I think Ben shared that if he never would have met me, his personality wouldn't have been the same. Like meeting me changed his personality for the better. And in the moment, I was thinking to myself, well, personality-wise, I've pretty much been this person my whole life. But I will say, because I have been with Ben, meeting Ben has really expanded my mind and my comfort zones and things like that. So I want to be clear that I said all that to say, like, some things I thought maybe even about pornography before I started dating you, like almost 8 years ago now, has definitely changed for the better. And so maybe my like comedy and like improv chops kind of you don't really have an impact on that because I am that girl. But I definitely think you have really, like, I remember our first vacation we went on together. I was like, oh, Ben doesn't go on vacations. He's an explorer. Like, we're not here to just sit on the beach and drink Mai Tais. We're here to, like, really, like, figure out what the locals do and, like, go on hikes off the beaten path. And so you really made me sort of, like, start experiencing life and get out of this mindset of, like, well, you go to work so you can live. You work before you play, and that's how the rules always are. So I definitely think you've just broadened my horizons with everything. And I say that to say, like, you are the reason I love porn now.
Wow.
I love porn by myself. I love porn with you. Yeah. I don't think I would have ever revered pornography the way that I do now.
Yeah.
If I had never met you.
So yeah, there are like elements of romance and porn that sort of go hand in hand. They sort of explore each other. That, it's funny on the topic of porn because we watched a viral video of these people talking about porn. There's lots of like Christian podcasters talking about porn as being evil. And it's so after watching those, I was like, what does the clinical data suggest about porn? And it essentially suggests that sometimes porn for some people who already have violent tendencies could potentially
violent.
Could
I
like
thought you were
make
gonna say like
violent.
addictive
or whatever. But
porn has made people more violent. Oh, I see now. I'm being. So Sorry.
So there's
porn I watch is not violent. So in my brain, I was like, what part? But I understand like
there's
the
elements
gang bang and like some
there,
of the BDSM that has been consented to on this video, but in real life, people might not.
Right.
I understand now.
In the same way that like alcohol, like sometimes, you know, as the Bible says, everything in moderation. I forgot what verse that is regarding, especially regarding to porn.
Right.
So
correct.
There is elements of like drinking. Some people should not drink, and maybe and maybe some people should not watch porn if they already like. And it also like depends of like what kind of porn.
Do you think people can be addicted to romance?
Yeah, I mean, you can be addicted to anything, right? But porn is sort of thought of as this like exceptionally evil thing, especially in Christian circles.
What do you think a danger of like reading too many romance novels or watching too much romance? What's the danger of that?
So the danger that was explained to me is that it creates unrealistic expectations in the same way that
like Love is Blind.
Like
all of those contestants, I'm like, y'all have not been in a relationship.
Yeah, I guess if you like constantly watch this romance over and over, you expect like you fall in love and there's a miscommunication and then everything is sort of fine from here on out. Yeah. And Something from Tiffany's is the most recent romantic comedy that we watched, romantic holiday film that we watched, is based in that, is that there's miscommunication, that miscommunication ends a year later, they get engaged, everything's okay. And it can create unrealistic expectations. And porn can be similar in similar ways. There was a great TED Talk I have to find of a woman who actually started a website like creating more realistic porn because she was having sex with younger men who were watching porn that, you know, felt too unrealistic, right? And again, we're talking like porn is a whole genre and there's so many different kinds of porn out there. Right. And how people consume it and who they consume it with, I think is very, it's very contextualized. But it is sort of funny to hear people like, this thing is so evil. When I'm like scratching my head, I'm like, I think I can name like 30 other things that are actually evil. There's nothing evil about porn. And then there's these weird lines that, you know, what is porn? It's like going to our art institute and like looking at a sculpted penis. I mean, that's pornographic.
Oh, I guess.
Right?
Yeah.
Right? So there's this I
didn't think about it like that.
Yeah, so there's all these different ideas about it. But, you know, porn is definitely a thing. You know, men tend, there are elements of porn that are not positive. Like men can act in porn longer than women, right? That has to do with patriarchy, not porn exclusively.
Yeah, I got you. So, I mean, every social ill is also just gonna seep into the sex industry, of course. Of course. But this book was not. I mean, there were obviously some scenes of just stylistically well written, like not. There were actually no scenes like just of lovemaking, but there might have been some scenes of like before or after. You remember reading like sort of like morning after, but it did a really good job capturing just like.
It's romance, not erotica.
Correct. It's romance, not erotica, but those that. I love it, Ben. Just that feeling of like meeting someone and just spending like long nights into the morning with someone.
You can't, separate from each other.
And just like the musk of that person the next day.
They talk. Oh yeah, there is a whole thing of like
open a fucking window,
slick with sweat, and there's a little bit of a piggy scene, of like just dirty. They're like. I didn't even read it that way. I read it as like, I want you so bad, I don't even want to take a shower.
Yeah. Just y'all know what it is. It's like when you meet somebody and then you have like a weekend fuck fest, and then you gotta open a window or somebody's gotta leave the room at some point. But maybe you don't. Maybe you just order takeout and then you get back in there naked and you eat and you go for a couple more rounds, and it's just a simpler time, And these are two. So a kid, I'm sure. Okay, I'm getting ahead of myself because I really did love this so much. Speaking of love, we do have one Apple Podcast rating to read. Would you like to read it?
Yeah. This is from That Girl Brit. I'm assuming this person is a she. I should not assume. I'm going to say Britt writes, love the banter. Love watching Amber and Ben and Wild on Instagram, listening to their podcast. I enjoyed their banter and the honesty of Namor handsomeness when they reviewed Wakanda Forever. Yeah, I guess that was sort of pornographic, some of your descriptions of Namor. I'm going to listen to the old ones to catch up, as I like how they review. Plus gives me more content to read, listen, and watch. Thank you, Britt. That's what we're trying to do here.
We are, and especially if you're like, Amber, I haven't read a book in years. Just pick this up. Like,
it's
you
short.
can knock it out in an afternoon. Because I truly did that. Like, and I know, and I get people are like, well, I don't work from home like you. I read this on a Sunday. Like, it was just, and keep your vibrator nearby because you might have some moments, you know. But just like, I was like, I miss that like funky. No, I don't miss it. We have sex pretty regularly, but it does remind you of a time where you just meet some, like, I feel like the first date we went on, the first time we went on a date, that date lasted like, it felt like over 24 hours. It
did. It lasted a long time.
Cause you're just like, I don't want to let this person out of my grip. Oh, are you touching my thigh?
Yeah, I'm touching your thigh.
Okay. Anyway, we're going to keep it about the book. This is not going to turn into a flick, y'all.
Yeah. So I will just go ahead and give you a short plot summary of this wonderful novella. So it's essentially a story about two men, a soldier, Lucretio, and a menagerie caretaker, Akib. They're from two different kingdoms, and they fall in love with each other in a society where like being gay is forbidden, essentially, both of their kingdoms. And then there are also like deities, gods and goddesses who use science, and then there are people who can like talk to animals and have telekinesis. So there's all this like fantastic element as well.
Yes.
But it really centers around Lucretio's and Akib's relationship.
Yes, and Akib can talk to animals.
Yes,
which is pretty boss.
Yes, he gets that power at some point. And he's a menagerie, for those who don't know. In like ancient kingdoms, kings had like tons of animals and beasts as just part of their, like, I guess, entertainment and part of their riches and glory. And so you would have a caretaker. And so Akib is very great with animals. He's very kind. He's described in more like effeminate terms throughout the book. And like, I guess in the stereotypical, I'm using air quotes, stereotypical way of effeminate. And
yes.
Let's get into that, because one of the themes I see through this is, I'm going to term it as familial dissonance, and this idea of, you know, having conflict with your family. And I kept on thinking throughout this book, because Akib has this awful brother named who just goes by Corporal.
Yeah, the Corporal. The
Corporal. And I keep on thinking, like, to what extent do you defend or cape for your family? Like, you know what I mean? Is it, and like, it's hard. Like, would you defend a family member if they were a murderer, right? And to, you know, finding that line of like, I'm going to like love you as a family, but will I defend you, is such a great question that everyone should explore and create those boundaries. But this, weirdly enough, reading this story reminded me of something that happened in the town I grew up. In 2014, a college kid, came and murdered his father with an axe. And sort of in the town, I was at Del Mar. You can look it up, the Del Mar killings. Murdered his father with an axe and disfigured his mom. And during the court trial, like, his mom was like, no, it wasn't my son. Like, even though she claimed she couldn't remember, she was very disfigured. I remember seeing pictures, just horrified. So that could be the case. But at the same time, like, this was a boy who would like break into their home, would lie about his grades, like forged transcripts from the community college, Hudson Valley Community College, to get back into the school and University of Rochester. Like, this boy had a history of being deceptive and even like doing violent things, like breaking into their home. And
his parents' home.
His parents' home.
Like breaking into their home while he was away at school.
Yeah, his mom knew that he was not like an honest, you know, child, and yet she still defended this. You know, he was convicted in 2006, so I was 16. Murders happened when I was 14. Convicted in 2006. But I kept on thinking about that, because the corporal like literally beats his brother. Like, at one point they talk about how the corporal has figured out hurting his brother to such an extent that doesn't leave bruises.
Yeah, which is what you do when you're. I mean, okay. A little bit of a zoom out, but I promise I'll zoom in quickly. So Ben wants a Kindle. That's been his whole big thing. I don't want a Kindle. And I'll tell you a small story why. Because I love when Ben and I are both reading a book and he's a little bit ahead of me because I can read his little handwritten notes in the book. And I say that to say when I got to this part of the book, his handwritten notes were something like, this is what true abuse is. Like when you are intentionally hitting someone where other people can't see the bruises and only the person that can only the person experiencing them will know that they're there. Like that's just like it's like physical but also like a psychological level of abuse because to an outsider it's like but you're fine, look at you.
Yeah, you're like
or yeah, I cannot get behind and Ben knows this because I've had to confront a family member about inappropriate things they were doing before. I cannot get behind just like fucking with family members who do wild shit that don't think like and I recognize there's like forgiveness but I'm talking about like just general personality or repeat offenses, or it's like the family member that always comes around and then things turn up missing. It's like, you know, this person, it reminds me of this TikTok where this kid with autism like went to speak on, they gave this kid with autism the mic to speak on behalf of his uncle. And he was like, well, you know, Robert was a thief. So
told him how it was.
And I was like, see, this child who maybe might miss some social cues here and there knows that this person is a thief. And for whatever reason, like, and I get it. Like, what are we supposed to do, Amber? Just exile this person? But it's like, no, but maybe somebody should confront them.
Yes.
Because what I've seen is a family member who is committing offenses sometimes quite regularly. Everybody just kind of deals with it so that like grandma won't be disturbed by this or whatever. But then when it comes to like a family member being gay, everybody don't deal with that. So I'm kind of like, so we're going to deal with like...
Well, they're not... They're going to deal with it. They don't accept it.
Correct.
So, yeah.
They find their ways to sort of like shun that person. So it's like... So it's not that y'all don't know how to shun motherfuckers. Because I've seen y'all kind of do that. But what y'all do is for literal like predators and thieves and like... abusers, we just welcome here, grab a plate. Like I don't like that shit. I don't fuck with that shit. I don't like sweeping like and call me like the crunchy granola cousin or whatever. But everybody in the family at this point, like especially my family in Georgia, knows that like I'm not just gonna sit there and like not shake some shit up if I see somebody weird in the mix. Especially now that I'm a parent, because I was like that before. But I don't know. It's really hard to do that because you don't want to like let something bubble up, let something fester. But I personally have a boundary now where I'm like, if so-and-so is there, I'm not coming. Like that is what it is. Y'all can choose to still invite them. Y'all can whatever. But I kind of tend to like call my family members out on their bullshit. Like, and I've had some talks with my dad once or twice. Again, my dad's great, but like every now and then he'll get into like a drunken, angry fit. And I've just been like, I'm not dealing with this. If you want to act like this, I'm not coming to the party.
Yes.
Right? But that's hard. That's hard for people.
And it's hard for, in this book, it's hard for Akib. And Akib doesn't realize the abuse of his brother until Lucretio sort of points it out and says, dude, like your brother's not a good person. And there's this element where Akib keeps on going back to this moment where he was a kid and his brother saved him from drowning. And there's these things that I was reading. I spent a lot of time just researching how abuse is normalized. And oftentimes someone who's being abused, the victim, will hold on to these singular moments of kindness and just hold this as an ideal, right? And it's funny. You see this in something from Tiffany's as well. Yeah. Remember like the woman in this film is holding on to this single moment
of like
to
how they met,
but
he was such a good person
and
here.
Justify how this person that she's with is
and
a
not
good
to
person.
Spoil it, but turns out I'm sorry I cut you off.
No, yeah, go for it. Yeah.
not to spoil it, but it turns out she even misremembered that. Or
yes.
She didn't misremember it. She was deceived in that moment as well. And she later found out how she was deceived. And so, I don't know. It's
and you need an external force to shake it up sometimes. You need an external force. You need someone to point out that, inconsistency.
I think in a lot of ways also just, because we're oversharers. In our marriage personally, I was having a conversation with Ben the other day about like, hey, like when I'm wrong about some shit, you need to like call it out in the moment, or you need to like tell me how you feel in the moment, because Ben is definitely somebody who, like, if we're,
especially if you're elevated. If I'm like, I'm going to hold on, I'm going to bring this up later, but I often forget about it.
Yes, I'll come to Ben. Let me just like think of something random. I don't know. Let's you spilled all the coffee. I don't know what you just did in my phone, but so you spill all the coffee, right? You spill coffee on the carpet. And I'm trying to be like, Ben, can you clean this up? Can you do da-da-da-da? And you're, making excuses about it or whatever. So let's say we get into a fight about some spilled coffee or whatever. In the moment where I'm talking a bit about something, he'll just like stop talking. So I'm kind of like, what's this apathy? Either tell me I'm overreacting, or tell me that you're going to clean it up, or tell me like, show me something. But when you go quiet, it makes me feel like you don't care about this issue.
Yeah,
okay.
It's hard to speak up when you see someone doing something that is wrong.
Right. Because sometimes Ben will be like, Ben will be whispering to me like, I think this person's scamming us or whatever. And I'm like, okay, well, we need to get the fuck out the car. Like, why are we whispering? Let's tuck and roll. Like, let's go. But like, there were like 1 or 2 times in India where you were like, God damn it, we just got ripped off. I'm like, then why'd you just give the money? Like, come on. Yeah. I would have had your fucking back. But why do you, as somebody who doesn't always like jump to react like that, why do you think that is?
It's sort of, I try to consider what's the ultimate goal of speaking, or what is the result that I want to speak up, and what could be the harm in speaking up, right? So sometimes there's an element of fear, which, again, this comes to me like reading about why people sort of allow themselves to be taken advantage of. And one of the things that comes down to fear, or this idea that if I speak up and talk, then, the situation might worsen for me. So that, I think there's an element of that where, you speak up so this thing will stop happening, or you speak up and then it's compounded, and the thing that you're trying to speak up against ends up increasing in violence, or increasing in, whatever. So that, and in the situation with you, if I see you saying something like, outrageous or inappropriate, me speaking up might compound your anger. And so I try to like, okay, you're elevated, let me hold on and like point out later and be like, and then point out, the words that you said were inappropriate for the following reasons. And oftentimes I just forget, because
you forget to what?
I forget to speak up.
You forget to speak up in the moment, or you forget to bring it up later?
In the moment, I'm like, you're angry. Like, me giving you correction when you're elevated will not result in what I'm hoping for it to result in.
Here's the thing about it. And for those of you listening, please speak up if this is you. I know that when I'm elevated, I am like, I will give you a full dissertation before you can even like open the can and get 3 words out. I know this about myself.
You're a fast speaker.
I'm a fast speaker, and I don't miss for the most part. I just need you. Ooh. I'm sorry, you're gonna have to edit this.
Do you want a cough drop?
Yes, please.
All right.
All I need you to do is say, Amber, I need 10 minutes. Amber, I need 30 minutes. Amber, I'm going to talk to you about this 10 a.m. tomorrow. Because I do want to hear what
is a good technique.
But when you because sometimes you'll be like, can we talk about this in the morning? And then the morning comes and you don't say anything then either.
I probably forgot about it.
Right. So I'm kind of like, so he doesn't care. I don't know. But I do, I say that to say you are A, working on it, and B, it takes somebody in both of our instances, it takes somebody who is not in your family sometimes to call that out. Because when we first started dating, you'd call out like,
it's like
your mom does this and that's a little interesting. And I'd be like, well, your dad does this and that's a little interesting. So
your mom is perfect. I don't think I've ever said anything bad about your mom.
You didn't say anything bad. You would just make an observation and you'd be like...
Never. Oh, no, I did say something about having 60 coffee mugs. It's like, yeah, that's interesting.
Right,
Who needs 60 coffee mugs? Yeah.
Like it takes somebody, an outsider who has no stakes in the game almost to sort of say
less
hey,
stakes,
I'm
perhaps.
Curious about the way that your family does this. Because I think, just to be completely honest, like your mother and I got really close when she came to stay with us, when she came to like nurse me back to health.
After the pregnancy.
Yes, after the pregnancy. And then every now and then I would talk to her about some things. I'm like, you are like a really funny person. You know this, right? And she's like, no, nobody's ever told me that before.
Yeah,
and
you
like,
need someone outside to say something to you.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think this is everybody listening, wanting you to speak up now or later, because your words matter to me a lot.
They do. And I know that they do. And I'm going to speak up more and more and more.
Cute.
Also, by the way, when I was researching abuse for this podcast, I was researching like familial abuse just because it is an important plot point in this story. And I kept on every website. Some of the websites I would go up would pop up and give a warning being like, hey, like, internet monitoring occurs even with different back channels. I was like, why am I getting this warning? Oh, if someone in your household is abusing you and you look up resources on abuse and your search history is being monitored, that could like result in more abuse. Being like, why are you looking up abuse? Yeah. So I thought I've never seen anything like that. Like, be careful reading this information if you don't want someone else in the household to know that you're researching this.
Abuse is such a it's so unclear sometimes, because when you close your eyes and think of abuse, you think of like two black eyes and two front teeth.
I think of dogs like being like repeatedly
yes, you think
right?
physical,
like
and
very
so
physical.
And any examples we have of someone being abused on TV or whatever, or like the Maury Show used to do these like horribly domestic violence episodes. It's like, that's all you think about, but we don't really see a lot of examples unless people share their actual stories. You do not see examples of financial abuse and psychological abuse and gaslighting. We're starting to slowly see that.
And that
on
happens,
TikTok and stuff like that.
And that happens in this book because at one point,
yes,
Akib is like, my father is really great and my father is so fantastic. And Lucretia says, no, he's not. Your father allowed your brother to do this to you.
Yes.
Your father's
your father might have sicked your brother
you're
on
like,
you.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
And you're like, yeah, there's so many other ways of abusing someone besides just the physical abuse. And
and it's hard to have that discernment so if you're this person, right? If you're this protagonist in this story, sometimes it's hard to discern whether this is truthful or whether it's like, okay, does this outsider who is visiting my tribe in my village also have vested interests in me as well? Like, will pulling me away then make me, like I think this is hell. What if I go with him and he's...
So the context in Lucretio telling Akib all these things is to get Akib to come back with him to his country. So
Akib is definitely battling with like, is what he's saying actually true, or maybe he just wants to get me away, and like how can I trust that this is happening in this moment? Because I watch a lot of like religious cult stuff, and one of the first things they do is like tell you like your family's out to get you, you're under attack, your faith is what you have to cling to.
Isolate the convert from their family is one of the first steps. And
and then you'll have these parents be like, well, they got to her brain, so at that point we couldn't even, she would steal our money and give it to the church, and she gave the church access to her phones and everything. Or so I could definitely see Akib going back and forth between like questioning everything he knew growing up, but also like what should I cling to or whatever.
It's talking about, clinging to the things that you grow up with, because Akib, in this story at one point, we're following the story, and he rejects Lucretio, and he ends up staying in his country, and he gets married to the king's daughter, and he himself has a daughter, Lucretia. And Akib, there are elements where Akib will say things like, "Oh, I prefer a woman's voice when they're singing, and I know that's a betrayal of my people, because in this society there's very clear distinctions between men and women and their expectations, and Akib generally prefers doing things that women do."
Yes.
And so he dresses, more effeminate. He prefers, his presentation. He doesn't like to do all the things that the boys do growing up.
There's even this like scene where he's like dancing, and in my brain he was just basically like voguing or something.
Yeah,
like
probably.
Like they describe his dance as like very different and a little bit more flamboyant as well.
The brightest, I think, is the exact wording. It's like he had the brightest dance. He wasn't the most talented, but he was the brightest. Right. And so he ends up having this daughter, and it's so funny because his daughter is more masculine.
Yes.
And prefers dressing this way. And he's like, it's so funny how parents do this. They are so unaware of their own presentation that they end up tearing down their own child. I just found that so fascinating. So he ends up like...
Say more about that.
So we're like, oh, I don't like... It's like, oh, you always... You think of your kid, and you're like, oh, your kid always has something to say.
Right.
Always something to say, and that's like a bad thing. And you paint that in a bad way. And yet, you as the parent always have something to say. You're not aware...
Oh. I mean, just wait till Wilde starts actually acting like us.
His daughter is doing the same thing that Akib does, just in a flip way. And so there's this element of queerness and cognitive dissonance, where cognitive dissonance is essentially where two people, have two opposing beliefs. So it's like you're an animal lover and yet you eat meat, right? Mm-hmm. And so Akib is more effeminate and gender bending, and yet he's rejecting his daughter's gender bending.
Yeah, there was this like TikTok of this stand-up comedian. He's doing crowd work, and he says to this woman in the crowd, like, "What do you do for work?" And she's like, "Oh, I don't work. My husband owns this restaurant, whatever." Right. And at that restaurant, like, nobody wants to work. We're having such a hard time finding employees. Like, nobody's working anymore. And the comedian's like, "You just said you don't work." Like
you hold on to that cognitive dissonance.
Yes.
Because it's so normalized for you, and you need an external force to point that out to you. I don't know.
Everything becomes like, well, not me. Other people need to uphold what I want, but not me.
Yeah, that's one of the things about parenting that I will have to be very aware of, where I'm like, I don't want my kid to do this, but I myself am doing this thing. So how do I prevent myself from, doing this? Or I don't know.
I think we should literally go into parenting, which we're already in it, but we should go into it knowing that like Wilde is literally going to just model the behaviors of everything we do. There's not going to be, which for me is why it is such a huge feat when a student is like a first generation college student or like that is still something to be very, very proud of. I am not a first generation college student. My mother went to college. My mother has a PhD, for God's sakes. So whenever I see or hear that someone went to college and they're the first in their family to do so, that to me is like, how did you do that? Because education was modeled for me so much in my household. My dad, barely graduated high school, but even he was like, I want better for y'all. I want y'all to be as smart as your mother. I like, this is what I want for my family. So like, and my mother helped me with the application, helped me with so many things, helped me with college essays. So to not have someone help you with that in the home support, and still go to college and graduate from college and be the first of your family to do so, you are a hero to me. I do not, like, that is such a incredible feat. I just want to like name that. Like every time someone says that they're like a first generation college student, I'm just like, tell me how you pulled this off. Like, and I get it. Like, you don't have to go to college to like put that into your child or whatever, but like when those cycles are being broken, like where does that come from? Because you might not have seen that behavior modeled, you know?
Yeah, generally I see some sort of teacher or maybe the family member take a vested interest in that. I think I don't really. I think there's this American idea, and I think it's not uniquely American, but it is a narrative that the U.S. likes to portray of like the single individual rising up from poverty and making it on their own, right? But when we look at the stories of people who do quote unquote come from poverty and make it on their own, they didn't really make it on their own, right? There was some sort of teacher, or maybe it was a family member, or some sort of, you know, situation that involved others that allowed them to do that. I really sort of reject this idea that someone can do something on their own, really do anything fantastic on their own.
Yeah, you always say this to me, it's about it takes a little bit of like discipline or a little bit of talent.
Oh yeah, it's like there are like 3 things that make someone successful in any sort of field. It's discipline, talent, and luck.
Yes.
And you only control one of those, and that is your discipline.
Yeah.
But even that, you know,
I think you could classes for your talent.
Well, that would come down to discipline, right? Because the discipline of going to the class.
Discipline, talent, and luck. Yeah. I agree.
Like being in the right place at the right time, having some sort of talent or some sort of, you know, the way you're raised, or, you know, whatever talent means, involves really you not having any choice on how that talent comes about. But discipline is sort of the one thing that you can choose. But I think there could be an argument made that even discipline is something that someone instills into you or teaches you how to do. So I don't know.
Like now, obviously I work in a very different field than what my parents wanted for me or what your parents wanted for you. But it does take a level of discipline to be like, well, I work for myself, so I need to like make a schedule. We need to have a morning meeting about making content, and because I could just like sleep in, and then where would we be?
Yeah.
Firked.
But also your level of learning that discipline came from working in an environment at a school that was very regimented and very strict, and that sort of, and you were willing to accept that, which is an element of that. But that's not something that you just inherently had.
Absolutely
like
not.
You were taught that discipline.
You're right. I want to talk about the Sybil effects real quick because you had something about that.
It's essentially the end of the story. Spoiler alert.
Huge spoiler, but awesome spoiler.
But essentially, the story is going back and forth. It's a time narrative going back and forth between Akib and Lucretio, you know, falling in love, but then Lucretio leaving, and Akib learning to live a life as essentially a straight person, and he marries, you know, the king's daughter, and it goes back and forth. Essentially, we come to the ending of the book, and Akib is 86 years old, and he dies with, you know, presumably maybe an old lover named Benj, I think Benji, at the end of the book. And essentially his wife has left to work, you know, doing math and, you know, magic in a different realm. And so he, you know, never reconnects with Lucretio, and it's very sad. Turns out, though, that isn't the end of the story. Turns out that Akib did go back to the country with Lucretio and essentially hiked up a mountain and went to a Sybil cave to see his life, what his life would have been if he never went back to Lucretio. So we're sort of deceived in thinking. So he actually never had a daughter, and it was very fascinating. I think the structure of this. I think I would have liked to seen more of the actual reality he lived in, which is
me too.
Him going back to Lucretio. Doesn't matter. The story is what it is. But I thought that was really powerful.
Yes.
The effect, because even that in like him reflecting is the story, and sometimes it shows the power of reflecting and the importance of reflecting. Also, Sybil is sort of a case study of a woman who was diagnosed with dissociative identity disorder. So this idea, and there's a term called a Sybil attack, when a computer network is essentially attacked by a number of like pseudonymous identities, and it it's essentially
I don't know what you're talking about.
So basically, the Sybil effect is this idea of having like multiple things of the same thing. So so him going to a Sybil cave.
I've read something about that before.
Him going into a cave is him just, it's like it's like a literary way of like naming a technique in which you see multiple selves of your own self.
Got it.
And what that world would have looked like. I don't know.
Yes. So the whole story that we saw was what his life would have looked like if he didn't join his lover.
Yeah.
But that's not what happened. He did get together with his lover, Lucretio. I think his name is Lucrio, but
Lucrio?
Yeah, but that's okay. It doesn't matter. So he did.
Lucrio.
He did get with his lover, Lucrio.
Lucrio. And
they just loved on each other all of their days, which was beautiful. So the abuse and the hellfires that we saw didn't happen.
Well, they did, but he was able to escape them.
He escaped those. I will say one thing about this book. I loved this book. This is not a sigh. This is just something to consider. I'm so sorry, everybody listening to this. I can't promise I won't be sick next time. Who knows? But please read this book with a dictionary nearby. There are a lot of what me and my mom used to call, there's some $5 words in here. There's some $50 words in here. So every other word for me was like, what does this mean?
There's some techno babble in it.
There's some intense vocabulary in this book, but I learned a lot. Like, read this book if you are studying for like an SAT or something, or not. But I definitely was like, what does this? Do you remember?
Even the characters don't know what the words mean at some points, because the gods essentially visit the earth here, and they use very complicated terms to describe their magic. And at one point, Akib is like, he's talking to these gods, and he says, I have no idea what you're talking about.
Yes.
So, I mean, there is a way to understand it, but you have to look up each of the individual words. And
which I enjoy doing. Well, some of them are also just tied to like, this word means an older European a palm fan, like some of them might also be like unique to the period.
Where did you come up with that?
I looked at a fondac or something, a FONDAC, and then a couple words I would look up, and they were like, "This is a fictional unit of measurement used in sci-fi books." I was like, "Oh," like some of the words are like tied to the region. Some of the words are,
maybe psionic.
Yes, like something that we wouldn't even use in America is
Major
what this word
Domo
means.
was another one.
Yeah, we would never say Major Domo.
We just thought that was a restaurant in LA.
Right, and where we pigged out, Anyway, I think we're about done here. I enjoyed this talk with you, and
the only side I do have is that it took us 112 episodes to come to like a primarily gay romance story. So
that's a sigh on us.
That's a sigh on us. We should have done better.
We'll get it together, but we have our entire lives to just read and watch shows, which we will be doing next week. You want to warp up the show with this book? Yeah,
read Kai Ashante Wilson's A Taste of Honey. His story is absolutely amazing. He didn't start writing seriously until he was in his mid-30s, and I think his first story was published when he was 40. So he started later than probably a lot of writers, and I find that really inspiring. So check out A Taste of Honey.
Love that. Thank you so much for listening to another episode of the Sci-Fi Sci Podcast. Up next for episode 113, we are going to be watching the new show Kindred, okay? If you remember, our very first episode was what we thought was going to be Kindred, which was Antebellum, which was definitely not Kindred. So we read Kindred for the very first episode, and now the show is finally here. So the new show Kindred, based on Octavia Butler's novel Kindred, is happening. All of those episodes will be available for binging on December 13th. Where are we watching these episodes again, baby?
It is on Hulu.
Hulu.
Being produced by FX.
Hulu. So be sure to watch Kindred on Hulu as of December 13th, and we will see y'all next week for the show. Bye, y'all.